Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating and honestly kind of a chilling presentation by Bill Gates.
Yeah, it's definitely a wake-up call.
Oh, absolutely. He argues that the basement bunkers of the Cold War were actually preparing us for the totally wrong doomsday. Like, think back to what the ultimate symbol of a global threat used to be for you or your parents.
Right, for decades, it was this very specific, incredibly physical thing.
Yeah, the danger we were told to fear most, the thing that could just end it all, was nuclear war. And the preparation for that was super tangible. People literally had giant barrels in their basements, filled to the brim with water, packed with canned food.
The whole operational plan was basically run down the stairs, huddle behind concrete, and just wait it out.
Right. And today we're going to look at why that mentality has left us utterly blind to the actual threat we face now. We'll cover the catastrophic systemic failures of recent outbreaks, and then this proposed military-style blueprint to fix it.
Because the psychology of the Cold War bunker was built around a visible mechanical threat, right, with very visible mechanical response.
Yeah.
A missile is a physical object. You can track its trajectory on radar. You can calculate its blast radius.
You can pour enough concrete to theoretically shield yourself.
Exactly. The global defense infrastructure was designed to counter something we could point a camera at. But the shift we have to make now is entirely conceptual.
Okay, let's unpack this. We essentially spent decades building the ultimate home security system against a burglar, the nuclear war, but completely forgot to install smoke detectors for a fire, which are the microbes. How do we become so blind to the microscopic threat?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the presentation makes a highly compelling data-driven argument that the greatest existential threat to humanity in the coming decades isn't an intercontinental ballistic missile, it's a highly infectious virus.
And just to pause here for you listening right now, the goal of this deep dive isn't to cause panic. We're not telling you to hoard instant noodles. It's just to give you a clear-eyed view of what's really at stake and how easily we can actually fix it.
Yeah, the disparity in our global investment is just staggering. We have massive deterrent systems for war and almost zero investment when it comes to epidemic prevention.
Which brings us to the ultimate stress test mentioned in the source, right?
Yeah.
The Ebola outbreak in West Africa.
Yeah, and to understand the depth of our lack of preparation, we have to look at what that crisis revealed. The terrifying reality wasn't that the global health system functioned poorly.
Right.
The reality was that there was no system at all. There was literally no overarching architecture to fail in the first place.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we all have this Hollywood image in our heads, right? A novel pathogen is detected, and within hours, a team of incredibly good-looking epidemiologists flies in on a helicopter.
Right. They jump out in hazmat suits.
Exactly, and they establish this pressurized, high-tech diagnostic lab in a field tent, and they sequence the virus in the nick of time and stop the outbreak.
Huh?
But you're saying that's pure fiction. The reality is just an empty room.
It's pure fiction. The specific operational failures during Ebola read like a manual on what happens when a society relies on movies instead of actual infrastructure. I mean, there was no standby team of epidemiologists ready to deploy.
None at all.
None. And to fight a pathogen, you have to understand its transmission vectors on the ground in real time. But nobody was there studying how the disease was moving.
So where was the data coming from?
Case information was largely filtering through local and international press outlets.
Wait, they were getting their data from the news. Relying on the news cycle for epidemiological data seems uniquely disastrous.
Oh, it is. Because by the time a journalist reports on a cluster of cases, those individuals have already been highly infectious for days.
Right, potentially spreading to dozens of others who have since traveled.
Yeah, so the data is entirely retrospective and highly inaccurate. Without trained diagnosticians on the ground, you're just relying on anecdotal symptom reporting.
Wow.
Furthermore, there were no medical teams standing by to deploy and no established system for rapidly training the local volunteers.
But hold on, what about the World Health Organization? Isn't there explicit mandate to jump into these exact scenarios?
Not exactly. The WHO is structurally designed and funded primarily to monitor disease trends. They provide normative guidance, like publishing the medical standards for treatment.
Oh, okay.
They are not a tactical, heavily armed field operations force. They don't have a massive standing army of doctors waiting on a tarmac. And because we lacked that, the text highlights several tragic missed opportunities.
Right, like the failure to use survivor plasma.
Exactly. The plasma treatment failure is a perfect example of why infrastructure matters more than theory.
Because we knew the blood of Ebola survivors was rich in antibodies.
Right.
Right. The theory is you take that convalescent plasma and transfuse it into sick patients to jumpstart their immune system.
Yeah, but you can't just draw blood in a jungle and hand it to someone else. You need highly specialized equipment.
Right, apheresis machines to separate the plasma.
Yes. And you need a continuous cold chain, basically unbroken refrigeration, to transport and store it. Plus, rigorous blood typing diagnostics so you don't trigger a fatal immune rejection.
Which is impossible in landscape with minimal power grids and zero-trained logistics personnel.
Exactly. The plasma intervention collapsed before it was even attempted. Nobody was looking at treatment options on a systemic level.
Yeah, the source does acknowledge the heroic work of groups like Doctors Without Borders.
Oh, absolutely. Monumental work.
But organizing a few thousand brave volunteers on the fly is vastly different from mobilizing the hundreds of thousands of workers required for a global pandemic.
Right.
Which brings up a massive contradiction.
Right.
If we had absolutely no system, if we were flying blind with late data from newspapers, why wasn't the casualty rate in the tens of millions?
Yeah.
The text notes the Ebola outbreak mostly stayed confined to 3 West African countries and killed roughly 10,000 people. If we failed the stress test that profoundly, how did we survive it?
We survived it entirely through luck. The source breaks down 3 distinct factors that prevented a global catastrophe, and not one of them is attributed to human preparedness.
Wow. Okay, what's the first one?
The first factor was the sheer bravery of local health workers. They physically tracked down citizens and tried to break the chains of transmission on foot.
Just incredible bravery.
Truly. The second factor was the biological nature of the virus itself. Ebola is transmitted through direct contact with bodily fluids. It is not airborne.
Right.
And by the time an infected patient reaches peak viral load and becomes highly contagious, they are typically so physically decimated by the disease that they are entirely bedridden.
Right, so they were too sick to walk through a crowded shopping mall or board a commercial subway train.
Exactly. The virus incapacitates the host before the host can widely distribute the virus.
That is so lucky. And what's the third factor?
That ties into geography. The outbreak predominantly affected rural areas. The text states explicitly that it was pure geographical chance the virus didn't establish a massive foothold in major urban centers.
Oh, man.
If a pathogen with Ebola's lethality had widely penetrated a sprawling urban environment, the exponential growth would have overwhelmed any volunteer response within days.
So what does this all mean for you, listening right now? It means that next time, the virus might let someone feel perfectly fine while they board a commercial flight or walk through a crowded market. If Ebola was a near miss, what does a direct hit look like?
Well, the presentation points directly to the 1918 Spanish flu as the historical blueprint for a worst-case scenario.
Right.
That pandemic represents the exact biological nightmare Ebola avoided. It was an airborne pathogen. It spread rapidly through the air, completely bypassing the need for physical fluid exchange.
And the human cost was just staggering. More than 300 million people died from that
Yeah.
pandemic. 300 million people. To contextualize it, you are talking about wiping out the equivalent of the entire modern population of the United States.
And that happened in an era when international travel meant spending 2 weeks on a steamship. Today, someone with an airborne virus can wake up feeling fine, board a high-speed commercial flight in London or Tokyo,
And walk through a crowded market on another continent 12 hours later.
exactly, coughing slightly and spreading the pathogen to hundreds of people before they even register a fever. An airborne pathogen in an era of hyper-connected global transit removes all the luck we relied on during Ebola.
Okay, so we've established the catastrophic gap between the threat and our current capabilities. We essentially have a gaping hole in our global armor.
We do.
But the overarching mission of this deep dive is to outline the solution. The proposal mapped out here is that we need to stop looking at global health through the lens of charity and start looking at it through the lens of military readiness.
Yes, the military paradigm. It is the only operational structure we have that scales to the size of this threat. We need to prepare for epidemics exactly the same way we prepare for war.
So like having soldiers on standby full-time.
Right. A nation doesn't wait for an enemy to cross its borders to begin recruiting civilians. They have standing armies waiting to deploy. They have massive reserve units that can scale up instantly.
So the proposal is to build a medical reserve corps utilizing that exact framework.
Exactly.
It sounds like we need the biological equivalent of a health NATO. Just perfectly coordinated logistics.
That's a great way to put it. When NATO nations deploy together, they don't figure out communication on the fly. They use identical radio frequencies, standardized fuel nozzles, universal supply chain protocol.
Right, the logistical standardization is the foundation.
Yeah. And marrying a medical reserve corps with the military muscle provides the necessary scale. The medical professionals bring the clinical knowledge.
And the military provides the rapid global transport, the heavy lift logistics, and the physical area security.
Precisely. To safely conduct triage and quarantine operations in chaotic areas.
And to test this, the source suggests running germ games instead of war games, right? To find system vulnerabilities.
Exactly. You run massive simulations to expose the bottlenecks before a real pathogen exploits them.
But wait, I have to push back heavily here. The source mentions a germ game played in the U.S. back in 2001 named Dark Winter.
Yes, it does.
And the final score was microbes 1, people 0. That's a pretty dismal track record. Is building a health NATO really enough if the microbes keep winning the simulations? Getting rival nations to share real-time biological data sounds impossible.
It is a huge geopolitical hurdle. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the structural optimism of the text is rooted in how radically our tech has evolved since 2001. We aren't fighting with analog tools anymore.
Okay, let's talk about the tech. The text mentions using cell phones, but how does that actually integrate into a military-grade response?
Well, in 2001, tracking disease spread required physical surveys. Today, billions of people carry mobile devices. We can use anonymized mobile network data layered over satellite maps to track population movements.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's highly predictive. By analyzing aggregate movement patterns, models can predict precisely which transportation hubs or neighboring cities a virus will jump to next.
So you no longer have to wait for a cluster of cases to appear in the press.
Exactly. You deploy your medical reserve corps to a location before the virus even arrives.
That solves the blindness issue. But predictive logistics only buys you time. Ultimately, you still have to neutralize the virus.
Which is where massive breakthroughs in biotechnology come in. Specifically, the source points to advancements like adeno-associated virus or AAV technology.
Right. To understand why AAV tech is such a game changer, think of an adeno-associated virus as a microscopic delivery truck.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, in nature, a virus breaks into your cells and deposits its own genetic material to multiply. But scientists have figured out how to hollow out that delivery truck. They remove the harmful DNA and replace it with specific instructions.
The genetic code for a harmless piece of the new pathogen.
Exactly. So when this reprogrammed virus is injected into a patient, it unloads those instructions, and the human body starts manufacturing the exact antibodies needed to fight off the pandemic.
It effectively turns the patient's own body into a localized vaccine factory.
Which is incredible.
It really is. In the past, making a vaccine meant growing live virus in chicken eggs for years. Now, the moment the pathogen is sequenced in the field, that digital sequence is uploaded globally.
And laboratories instantly start synthesizing the genetic instructions.
Right, shrinking the turnaround time from years to months or even weeks.
So the pieces of the puzzle are all sitting on the table. We have the communication networks, the military infrastructure, the synthetic biology.
They just need to be assembled into a unified system.
Which brings us to the final hurdle. The economics. Building a global military-grade health response sounds incredibly expensive.
It does. But the financial argument relies on comparing the cost of prevention to the cost of catastrophe.
The World Bank's grim estimate.
Yeah. Their models indicated a severe global flu pandemic would destroy more than $3 trillion of global wealth.
$3 trillion. It's the ultimate no-brainer. It's like arguing over the price of a fire extinguisher while your house is actively soaking in gasoline.
Exactly. Compared to a $3 trillion crater, the investment for this system is remarkably modest, and the capital doesn't just sit dormant waiting for a disaster.
Right, there are massive side benefits. The infrastructure has incredible dual-use value.
Fortifying the front lines in developing countries is the first step, because that's where zoonotic spillovers usually happen.
When a virus jumps from an animal to a human.
Yes, and when you build a clinic there to detect a novel virus, you are simultaneously building a clinic where a mother can safely deliver a child.
Or establishing cold chain logistics for experimental vaccines, which is the exact same refrigeration needed for routine childhood immunizations.
Right. You are fundamentally raising the baseline of human health on a daily basis.
So to synthesize this deep dive for you listening, the takeaway is incredibly clear. We have to completely abandon the basement bunker mentality of the past.
The invisible microbes are our greatest threat.
Yeah. Ebola was a wake-up call that exposed a total lack of global systems. but by combining modern technology with military-style readiness, logistics, and germ games, we can absolutely be prepared.
And again, there is no need to panic. Time is of the essence, but the tools to fix this already exist if we prioritize them.
It fundamentally changes how you view global security. But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought derived from a very brief mention in the source text.
Oh, yeah.
The text briefly notes that the next virus could be a natural phenomenon, or it could be a product of bioterrorism. Think about that for a second.
It's a heavy thought.
If we actually build this massive, flawless, military-grade health NATO to stop natural viruses, does that perfect defense system inherently discourage rogue actors from even attempting biological warfare?
I mean, if they know their engineered pathogen will be neutralized in weeks.
Exactly. Does preparing for a natural disaster accidentally become our greatest shield against a human-made one? Something for you to ponder until next time.